All right, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Today, like I said last week, we're going to start talking about a little bit of tech. And for that, I've invited on Dr. Michael Sonne, who is the VP of Research and Innovation for PlayProAI, a company focused on measuring and describing human motion. Mike is also the research director for the Baseball Development Group in Toronto, Canada, as well as an adjunct professor at Brock University. At Brock, he and his graduate students focus their research on better understanding the measurement and analytics of pitching mechanics. Mike has also written about pitching biomechanics for The Athletic, Hardball Times, Fangraphs, and Baseball Prospectus. One of my favorite facts is his workload metric fatigue units, which is something that him and I have actually worked on before, is widely used in the MLB as a better physiological representation of pitching workload, and it's a metric recently included in the Modus Baseball app. He is going to be accompanied by Casey Mulholland, who is our representative from Kinetic Pro. Casey is the founder and lead developer of Kinetic Pro Performance in Tampa, Florida, and he is a former pitcher for a host of organizations: LA Dodgers, University of South Florida, State College of Florida, University of Mississippi, and IMG Academy. At some point, Casey, I'm going to have to ask you how you managed to pitch for that many colleges. But I guess we'll get there at some point. And at that, go ahead and take her away, Dr. Sonne.
Thanks, Jason. You can hear me fine? Thumbs up if you can hear me there, Jason. All right, cool. Well, thank you very much for having me on, and I'm sure Casey shares my enthusiasm for presenting to this group. I'm going to share my screen here. Give me 1 second. WebEx being a little bit difficult today, but
that'll happen.
Yeah, always at the perfect times. Just a spinning wheel here on connecting. You've seen that before, Jason?
I haven't personally, but I know Stan has had some issues with it, or some of our other presenters have had issues with it in the past. You do have that share content button rolling, though, correct?
Yeah. So when I click on that, it pops up a window and says connecting, and it's just kind of spinning infinitely. Here, give me 2 seconds.
Yep.
I will be right back.
Roaring start to Wednesday, ladies and gentlemen. Roaring start.
You know any good jokes?
No, back in my younger days, maybe, but definitely not any that are appropriate for this room right now. All you, Sean. Fire away with the dad jokes, would you?
How do you find Ronald McDonald on a nude beach? He's the one with the sesame seed buns.
Love it. Love it. Casey, are you in here? Did you plan on showing any visuals or anything like that? And do you want to try and test that out while we wait for Mike? Sweet, that'll work. Just make sure you razz Mike for being able to figure it out. He should be back in just a minute. He's just trying to restart.
We're back in action.
Hey, there we go.
Okay. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
It always works right up until the point where you need it to work, right?
Sure.
Okay. Perfect. So get going here. All right. Let me know if you can see my screen there. Perfect. Okay. Well, sorry about that. Thanks again for having me, Jason, and honored to speak to a group of athletic trainers. I'll give you a little bit of background into myself and how I got to this point here, but I just want you all to know that I desperately wanted to be an athletic therapist at points in my career. I worked for 5 years with the University of Windsor football team in a student therapist role, and right up until my final co-op term, I thought that was the road I was going down, and ended up not doing it because they changed a program here in Canada from a 2-year to a 4-year program. Little did I know I was going to go back to school for 6 years more after that. So I'll tell you a little bit about Pitch AI and what we're trying to do here. So my introduction there, how we got to this product. For the most part in this presentation, what we're going to do is I'm going to speak about the research and the development on how we develop the product. And then I'm going to let Casey Mulholland talk a little bit about how he's integrated it into his training methods at Kinetic Pro. So taking one step back here, I'll tell you a little bit how we got to this position and how we got to developing Pitch AI. So it all comes back to ergonomics. And as much as this sounds like it's something that's totally unrelated, my training and my PhD is actually in occupational biomechanics, and my thesis was on developing a muscle fatigue model to better understand how assembly line workers became injured. But throughout my postdoc, one of the things that was kind of an integral part into me getting back into sport and me getting into baseball was there was a point in time where Major League Baseball started talking about implementing a pitch clock. And given I had a fatigue model there that showed that if you decrease rest time, fatigue levels would go up, I was very eager to get into that field, and I published a paper in the Journal of Sports Sciences that gained a lot of traction and really got me into writing about baseball and applying some of the ergonomic principles that we had learned into the baseball space. So much like you have assembly lines in the workplace, you see a lot of repetitive motion involving the upper extremities in the baseball world. And where we draw a lot of the similarities there is that we tend to focus on 3 main items when it comes to understanding the ergonomics of injury. It's force, posture, and repetition. And when we look at the surrogates of that in the baseball space, that is the velocity, pitch counts or workload, and mechanics. Now, as Jason mentioned, fatigue units and the workload component there, that's something that I feel we've started to get a better understanding of in recent years. Velocity is what it is. Mechanics have been the part of this that have been the most challenging to capture. So when you're talking about mechanics and understanding how people move, it can be very, very difficult. It requires oftentimes a lab, expensive equipment or some sort of knowledge of 3D math. I would also say, and I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, that pitching mechanics tend to be one of the most abused domains for the gurus of the world. So looking at Twitter and places like that where people talk about this mechanical characteristic that 100% of the time leads to injury, and Tommy John twist and inverted W's, all that stuff. Now, one of my my recent graduate students who just graduated and is now working with the Texas Rangers, his thesis was to look at if we could have coaches and scouts evaluate the mechanics of pitchers, and primarily at the instant of front foot strike. And what we got them to do was look at some video, and it was video of pitchers throwing in our lab where they had full mocap, so we had gold standard of what their joint angles were. And we got them to evaluate a still frame at that moment of front foot strike. And they didn't have to give us an exact number. It was basically ranges. So they clicked on different bins. So, shoulder abduction here, less than 83 degrees, between 83 and 110, and another bin. And they would choose which one. And the scary thing about that is we found that the coaches were actually incorrect about 50% of the time when compared to that motion capture. So when you're talking about looking at a still frame or even just a one plane video, the naked eye doesn't really give that objective measurement that we want. So now there is a definite need to have some sort of faster biomechanical assessment that's more accurate than the coach's eye, but it's less intrusive and it's a lot more game usable, unlike that biomechanics lab there. And PitchAI kind of lets us get the best of both worlds and learn a little bit more about how pitchers move for both performance and for health. Now, what I'm going to walk you through is just a little bit about how this application works, but keep in mind the application is a way of capturing video and a way of displaying results. What we've been doing with Casey is Casey's been sending us video, we've been analyzing them and returning him the data. And that's eventually where we see the product going, as kind of online dashboards and that type of an interface. But the general way that the capture works is that we look for about 240 frame per second video, which is your typical iPhone slow motion setting. And similar to like a check caching app, we ask for the pitcher to be put in one position in the app, hit go, it records for about 3 to 5 seconds, and then we get return a biomechanics report. And that report is going to give us, our joint angles, our joint velocities, and even some of those findings we had with the pitching mechanics tool. And I'll give you a little clip of video here. One of the things that it will do is it's going to give us the ability to overlay very easily any two pitchers' mechanics. So if you've got somebody who been quite healthy, or somebody who's a really high performer and you want to compare yourself against them or compare anyone against them, we can very quickly do that in this application. So one of the kind of cornerstones of this is the ability to compare any two pitchers or any pitcher against themselves. You want to look at the effects of fatigue, or maybe somebody is tipping pitches. It makes it very simple to do something like that. So from that video, we generate basically an instantaneous biomechanics report. And these metrics here are some of the more common ones. I think we've got 15 total metrics related to the throwing arm, the glove arm, both legs, and then the trunk and pelvis. But what I'm going to show you a little bit of right now is really about not so much the how we get the video, but how accurate this is. Now, what we have done is we've looked at calculating error between our PitchAI system and our motion capture system. So the idea here was to say, what exactly do we have? Like, what is this in terms of its accuracy? We've seen quite a few attempts at using computer vision to measure mechanics, but really it's a 2D type of thing, and we're trying to get 3D motion from our single plane video. And then what we also did was we looked at where the individuals were, and our pitchers from our group were at foot strike, and we compared them against the results from our pitching coaches from our study we did. So a little on how this all works here. So you can see we've got In red there, our motion capture system. In black is PlayProAI. And this is all coming, once again, from a single camera. And you can see those move very similar to each other. There's a little bit of difference, and I'll explain some of those things here too. Also, Casey gets a little bit of a cameo before he actually does his presentation here. This was him throwing outside or pretending to throw outside in San Diego back at the winter meetings. So to give you a little bit of an idea, our main way that we were capturing the relationship between the motion capture and our AI, our computer vision capture, is with a correlation, as well as calculating the percentage error in the range of motion. So you can see here our R-squared values are very strong. You know, R-squared's of 0.8. The lowest was on the glove side, 0.6. And our best performer in general was that trunk tilt angle. And you can see there an R-squared of about 0.92 with only about 4% error compared to motion capture. And what we can do with our data here, and what you'll see in both Casey's graphs as well as many of these other graphs that we're putting out, is everything is in terms of phase of motion. So 0% being when the motion starts, 100% being just after ball release. The green line is when the person gets their leg to peak kick. Yellow is at the instant of foot strike, and then red is at the moment of ball release. Now, the other thing to look at here specifically is that we really do want to be looking at those different markers. And you can still see there, once again, our R-squared values and our percentage of errors, they do vary at foot strike and at ball release. But once again, fairly consistent with respect to our motion capture data there too. And some of the reasons why we would want to be using these markers is to understand how somebody gets involved in their kinematic sequence. And what you'll see with some of this video that gets output here, and I'll try my best to pause it, is we'll have the moment of foot strike, and then the different segments will start to turn green, yellow, and red to give you an idea of how that person's sequencing. And that's all with respect to their peak velocity. And what we'd like to ideally see is our pelvis, our trunk, and then the arm turn red there. So as you can tell here, it's not a perfect representation of the motion capture system, but when we compare our results against what the pitching coaches did, the PlayProAI outperformed the coaches. And on 10 of those bins, and this was an initial evaluation, we're going to be running this again soon. I actually think this is probably going to go up, but the PlayProAI was more successful in identifying those kinematic characteristics than the naked eye. So when I like to explain how we use this application and where this application fits in terms of the accuracy spectrum, you have all the way on one end, that's like the pure subjective, the eye test, that part of it. That one is all the way on the one side. On the other end, we have our gold standard, our motion capture. We're about 3/4 to about 90%. Between 3/4 and 90% as accurate as that motion capture system. Now, just to talk a little bit more on that scientific side before we dive into Casey's side of things, I also wanted to show a little bit about kind of the sensitivity of the tool and how this can be implemented. We went down to spring training before the world changed dramatically and did a couple experiments. The biggest one was to just get as much data on high-level throwers as we possibly could. And I think we ended up getting about 50 pictures and close to 300 videos in total there. But one of the little things that I wanted to try out was to see the effect of parallax on the PlayProAI analysis. So what I did is I filmed a pitcher throwing, right at third base, and then just moved 10 feet down the fence until I had 3 different camera angles there. I also was able to get some video capture of a pitcher kind of at ground level, and then go up in the upper deck and see how things look there as well. Now, I'm not going to go too far in depth here, but this article is actually up on our website, and we can share that link with you afterwards if you'd like to take a look into some of this data a little bit more. So the horizontal effects here, as you can see, what we've got here is our average external rotation of the throwing arm shoulder at the instant of peak kick, at foot strike, and at ball release. And that's for the 3 cameras. So as we move further down the line, and you can see those averages are relatively consistent. At ball release, we see a little bit more variance there. However, that was the external rotation was our worst performer in that sense. Looking at a little bit more of the vertical side of things, once again, you can see that at the kick, at foot strike, relatively consistent. At ball release, we get a little bit more, but the ball release part there is it's not so much about the kinematics being different. It's a little bit more about identifying that marker, which we've been tweaking as well. So you can see here, it's not so much, while we do try and get that open side video, we do have a little bit of room for error there if it's being used in a certain context. So some of the biggest applications we've seen for Pitch AI so far has been in training, like what Casey's going to tell you about, as well as in scouting. If you're not able to get right to field level, or you're not able to get a bullpen, you can still get accurate biomechanics data just from being up in the crowd. So a little bit now on how it's used. One of the ways that we've been implementing things is to take baseline video, to work with the coaches to help identify areas of improvement, use drills, practice to refine mechanics, and then take more video and track progress. And when you start pairing this biomechanical data along with your other metrics, like Casey's going to show you a little bit about, like along with the Rapsodo, along with Modus, we can start to see some really cool things here. So that's the technical side, and I'm happy to answer any questions kind of as we go. But I think Casey's got a short deck to kind of show off here, talking about his implementation of things, and then we can open up the floor for questions if that works well for you, Jason. Okay.
Sounds good to me.
Awesome. So I will let you pass the ball then to Casey and let him present. Awesome.
Casey, you can fire away when ready, man, unless you want me to reintroduce those schools. Oh, you might need to unmute yourself. One sec. I'm sorry.
Hold on.
There we go. That's better.
All right, you hear me now? Perfect. Excellent. All right. So I'll talk about those schools in a second. We'll cover that in detail. No, I want to go over a couple main things today. Going to talk a little about how we use Pitch AI, the implementation of Pitch AI within our facility and our in-facility training. So I'm going to cover a couple main things today. Number one, who is Kinetic Pro? We're a relatively new company, so give me a little background on where we came from, and I'll cover those schools in that segment. And then we'll go to the biomechanics and why biomechanics, really why Pitch AI. And then from there, we'll give you guys a little case study, give you a little example of our approach and how we actually use the Pitch AI format within our daily training. So. Give you guys a little background on Kinetic Pro Performance. We're based out of Tampa, Florida. We were founded back in 2017. My story, I was supposed to have a first-round draft pick out of high school, missed it by about 60 days of Tommy John surgery. So my career has been riddled with injuries, bounced me from Ole Miss to State College of Florida to University of South Florida, eventually getting drafted by the Dodgers. Got one season in, started moving up and tore my rotator cuff. So all along the way, I was seeking answers as to how do we stay healthy, how do we help guys understand what to do, or just continue to grow upon the process that was already in place. Had a lot of unique experiences through IMG Academy when I was younger with sports science. Got to hang out with Ben Hansen and the Modus team from 2013 on. They were a big part of us founding the business here at Kinetic Pro Performance. So workload management is a huge piece of what we do. And we have a philosophy called T3, which places workload management first, strength second, and then mechanics third. We've always looked at mechanics, and I've been to say we don't really know enough yet, and we didn't have the resources, being a new business, to be able to jump in immediately and grow. So with a biomechanics lab. My minor league salary didn't quite cover a biomechanics lab at the time when we first got started. So there's three main pieces what we do. We have our baseball side of things where we really just work with pitchers. And that's where I head up most of my day. I also work with the analytics side very closely. We run pretty deep analytics on seasonal stats and work with guys around the world. Really have a couple guys in Japan, and we work with them to understand TrackMan data and walk them through their outings. We also are able to help elaborate success rates for a lot of guys and talk to them about adjustments that they need to make. And the last piece is strength. And we have Garrett Phelps, our strength coach here. And we run our guys through a combination of those three things on a daily basis here at our facility, utilizing technologies and our own system to actually work with guys to help them understand how to improve, set objective goals, and then continue to measure over time. So why biomechanics, and really why pitch AI? And to go to this, talk a little bit more, I met Mike back in December. I'd followed him for a little bit on Twitter and was extremely interested in utilizing AI to bring biomechanics to our guys in more real time on the floor. What we realized was that we were using video and trying to create a score value system, much like the FMS. We were doing a 1, 2, 3 scale, trying to calculate mechanics with guys. And we just realized the subjectivity of that was just not something we could continue on with and have success for the long term. We felt like we needed to be more objective and continue to dive deeper. However, like I said before, with our funding, we weren't able to purchase a biomechanics lab. So we were looking at other alternatives. Talking to Mike, stumbled into Pitch AI and realized how much value it brings to the day-to-day training of our athletes and the ease of use, which is another component of having a facility like ours where we're running through 50 athletes on a day-to-day basis. Being able to set them up, take open side video, and then get reports back objectively is huge. We quickly realized how wrong we were in some cases. We saw things with certain guys that we had perceived that were right, but our eyes lie. And the objective feedback from Pitch AI has been instrumental piece in allowing us to understand the depth of where guys are at and communicate as a team between our strength space and our training space, or for throwing our training space, and be able to provide better correctives, more organized training protocols, and see guys getting to their goals quicker. So second piece is prescription systems. So we've been devising plans utilizing the data that we're receiving. So we collect data from Pitch AI and CSV. We're able to basically create out a model where we're basically building if statements, meaning that if we see this, we're going to build and do this. If we see this, we're going to do this. And then once they've accomplished part number 1, we're going to move them to part number 2. That's been a huge part of our team because we're able to communicate back and forth and say, for example, if a guy has a shoulder issue and we see it's a mobility issue, then we can turn him over to our strength coach, or in other cases, it would be an athletic trainer. And we'd say, hey, we need to get to this position first, and then send him back to me. And then want to begin to implement more drill work or constraint training at that time, and help them learn to pattern build up and obtain better movement goals. So last is assess, progress, and retest. Pitch AI provides us a base where we can assess very regularly. It's not as invasive as a traditional biomechanics lab. I ran through the Modus lab back in 2013. I've done a couple biomechanics studies with people while I was a player, and it was always awkward throwing in my underwear. So no matter how many times you prepare for it, you're in a pretty cold laboratory because they don't want the markers flying off. And your output's typically a little bit down because the intent of the situation, you've got a lot of people watching. Again, you're in your underwear. You've got markers all over you. It just becomes more invasive. What I've noticed is that our guys have been able to produce normalized velocities, give us higher outputs, and we're able to more regularly test them, progress them once they've hit obtainable goals, and then we retest to make sure that they're continuing to move forward. So I'm going to run real quick through our assessment. So this is kind of continuing on with why biomechanics. Run you through a couple of pieces that we have that we utilize, and then kind of how we communicate back and forth amongst our group here on the floor. So we have our physical assessment, which we start off with a body composition. Then we run through the Modus 1, which is a range of motion screen. We're able to take objective measures with a 6-sensor program that they have. It's 6-sensor, 6 IMUs basically placed across the body, taking things like T-spine rotation, measuring internal, external rotation of the shoulder, internal, external rotation of the hip, and many other things. We then go to a SCAP screen. We're looking at, trying to flag things like scapular winging, the basics of kind of a subjective viewing of the scaps. We then have our KP PET and shoulder strength testing, which is a product that we have coming out at the end of the year this year. We were actually able to model out strength day to day for our athletes around where they're at from a shoulder strength standpoint. We're devising dynamic band programming based off of those test scores. And we're also looking into workload metrics based off of those test scores, which have been unique. We've seen 4-day recovery cycles with our starters, especially that we can kind of plan around. So there's a workload management component to that. Lastly, we have EUR, centric utilization ratio. We calculate using a speed for lift system. So that's the physical assessment aspect of things. Then we go to our pitching assessment. We have pitch profiling and seasonal assessment, where we run through TrackMan data from the previous year. We take pitch profiles from guys who can provide us CSV reports, or if I can pull it online. We then create and run many of the statistics, things such as whiff or FIP, just to determine a understanding for the athlete to where they know how successful their season was, quantifying what they've done in certain segments, and where we can improve and start to draw up some goals or game plans for the next season, or off-season training to plan for that next season. We then have workload management planning. We actually custom design their workload management for 4 months out. We take TrackMan data and model out what they've done the previous year. It gives us a chronic workload base. We're able to determine where they're at, and then we try to build them out a chronic workload base to return them to, or potentially push them past, depending on their needs for the next season, if they're going to be a starter or reliever, or moving up another level. And the last piece, and the glue to all of this, is PitchAI. So then we take PitchAI, we have them throw pitches for us. We typically do about 5 to 10 pitches for our athletes. And what we do is we take the scores that we get, the CSVs that we get, we dive deeper into the biomechanics analysis, and then we will turn back together as a team, myself, our strength coach, and our analytics team. We will get together and we'll say, okay, this is what we saw actually on the mound in more of a competitive space. What did you see from the physical component? We'll then talk about what we saw from the previous season, if there were any red flags that were raised, and we'll try to put together a bigger picture to create programming that works for our athletes to progress them to, number one, creating achievable goals, and number two, getting into the season where we can communicate what is a successful progression into the season next year. So the last piece is we're going to have them continue to train. So in the off season or in season, we're going to have them continue to train. The great thing about PitchAI is it's remote as well as in facility. So we're able to send our guys out. As long as they send us open side video, we have them capture in slow motion. We can assess them still from a distance, and we can assess them in facility all the same, continuing to collect metrics year round with our athletes. So now I'm going to go through a subject A, is what we're going to call them. This is going to be a little kind of an example of how we would use PitchAI in our facility, and give you guys kind of a real world example of somebody that's in our facility who we are uniquely working with and trying to find new ways to approach their training. Subject A is 21 years old. In the screen that we used, we found that they had a prior right shoulder injury. They missed some time on the DL the previous years, so we gave them basically a questionnaire. They filled that out. We got that information. We found out they had below average stability, so we ran them through our Modus 1 testing, as well as kind of observed them in the first week of training. We observed below average stability. The metrics told us they had below average stability. And then we also saw that they had below average hip internal rotation on both hips. So when we looked at that, we saw that objectively in the Modus 1 screen, and we were able to talk to that athlete, ran them through some testing as well, some correctives as well, and noticed from a training standpoint that that athlete also was limited in their movements through some of the mobility training that we were doing with them. And then we ran them through PlayProAI, and what we saw here was unique. So we see subject A here. We see the green line is their hips, the white line is the trunk, and then this is abduction to adduction of the arm. And we see that this plot is kind of jumbled together. So we see the arm moving to ball release, and the trunk are kind of working one and the same. We have an elite subject, or kind of the more ideal biomechanics graph that you want to see the kinetic chain actually functioning. So we have hip, shoulder, and then arm coming through at separate segments. So most coaches would see this and watch this athlete move, and they would say, we need to evaluate the rotation. Your hip to shoulder separation is a common term that people will be using in my space, where as a pitching coach, they may not quite fully understand the timing of it, but they're looking at the degrees of motion and stopping at foot strike to try to determine if this guy is at adequate hip to shoulder separation or not. So next, I'm going to give you guys a little example here. I'll move kind of back and forth on it. This is the actual athlete himself. And as we discussed a second ago, one of the big red flags that we saw was the trouble with internal rotation. So you're going to see that kind of in action here, and how it kind of moves up the sequence for him. So we have an internal rotation limitation on the right leg here. So as he goes to internally rotate this back knee, you're going to see that he actually kind of cheats. He takes his foot up off the ground, goes to the toe, and he struggles to draw that knee internally as he goes to rotate. So from there, we see as the foot goes down to contact, the hips do not open fully, kind of limiting his range of motion, pelvic rotation. And therefore the hip shoulder separation timing, because the back hip or because of the back leg early, is now causing a timing issue going into front foot strike. We then see pelvis rotation occur, and as he goes to finish the throw, a lot of coaches will call this the lawn chair, where he kind of folds up the back leg into the front leg, and he kind of stands straight up. We also see the right hip does not continue to rotate. When we look at this on a graph, we're able to come in here and see, just as we saw before in the previous graph, we see the arm here in the white, so it's going to adduction. We see the range of motion of the hip. You see his peak range of motion and the arm are both coming together kind of at ball release, versus our more elite athlete that we saw before. You see this range of motion occurring just before ball release, obviously creating two separate segments. When we looked at these athletes and used PlayProAI, we were able to see hip to shoulder at front foot contact for our subject A. So this athlete here, we saw 43 degrees for subject A, and for our more elite athlete, we saw 53 or 55 degrees. That's the measurement of separation between the pelvis and the shoulders. It's a metric that Mike has built through PlayProAI and that we're able to use to see this. So again, as I stated before, most coaches would be looking at this and they'd be already considering what do we do for hip to shoulder separation drills, maybe looking at plyo-care throws or constraint patterns with other modalities to start to understand how to help this guy, this athlete, understand hip to shoulder separation. When we dive a little bit deeper, there's something to be noted here, and this is where the communication overall between a pitching coach, an athletic trainer, and a strength coach come together. The athlete that we looked at, because we were able to use objective measures such as PlayProAI, we did note that there were some things that were quote unquote different. They didn't function as what we would call efficient, but this athlete throws 99 miles per hour. He was a first-round draft pick last year. He's just a really good athlete. He knows how to pitch, has great stuff. He's been very successful. He's just a really good super compensator. He's able to understand how to get his body to do something that is elite. So for me as a pitching coach, having PlayProAI, what it allows me to do initially is be able to take a screen on him, see that data, and then evaluate better where I can place him to help him obtain potentially better movement quality. For me, in this case, we've put him in the weight room. We've put him actually with a PT, and he's been doing more corrective work to obtain better internal rotation of the hips. I have not dropped him into any mechanical training in terms of constraint drills or trying to force him into positions when he throws. First and foremost, we have to build a physical base, and we're hoping that over time that transfers over to the mound. But in an athlete like this, who was a first-round draft pick, who does throw 99 miles per hour, we don't want to grossly change the way that he works. We want to continue to aid him in development and continue to aid him in growth. We'll continue to do that with PitchAI over time, track the change, and see if the corrective work that we're doing makes a difference. So that's all I have for how we use PitchAI, how we work with facility training. And Jason, I'll throw it back to you. We can open up for questions.
I know you guys are in beta right now, so my first question is what's your anticipated release, and potentially, do you know a price point at this stage of the game?
We'll have to get back to you on so the price point is going to vary from app to actual integrated dashboard, and we can probably, I'd say towards the end of the month, we'll have a better clarity on that, but we're expecting release beginning of July.
Do you, you said app to dashboard, do you have an example of what the dashboard might look like at this point?
So the dashboard is going to look a lot like what Casey was showing there. So it'll be very comparable to that. You can have some kinetic chain graphs, you can pick your different players, that type of thing. As another point of reference here, because I know it is used in college baseball, we've recently partnered with Driveline as well, and PitchAI will be embedded in the track system there too. So, part of it, we are in beta right now. We are actually even pre-beta, but the the scientific part of it's pretty hammered out pretty solidly. So now that we have a good understanding of what data we have and what data is important to coaches, our dashboard is going to continue to be refined.
Anybody have any questions for these guys? Now's the time. I mean, I honestly think the product's pretty great. I think that's awesome for those of us, pending the price point, obviously, for those of us that can't afford a fancy biomechanics lab. And I'd certainly be interested to see what some of it plays up to, like you guys were saying, between what coaches report and what we actually see, what is on the data.
We can get you some pricing pretty shortly. We'll meet internally just as we're working on our rollout, and I'll get that for you very shortly.
Awesome.
Hey, Casey, this is Scott Stansberry from Notre Dame. Just curiosity, is your physical assessment and those sorts of things, pitch analysis and pitch preference, those sorts of things with the pitchers, would you compare that to things that Driveline does in their assessments and P3 and those sorts of things? Would you kind of make that, is that comparable?
Yeah, so I'm not 100% sure. I actually trained at Driveline in 2015, and it was far different back then than it is now. I'm not really sure what they have today, or P3 or any of the other groups. I know they all do a great job. All of our stuff we have a local PT that we work with, and I took a lot of the things that I had in pro ball and other places. We just visited different realms and leaned on our network and put together a process that we felt covered the basis of what we were looking for in terms of goals. So I don't have a specific yes or no to the question, but I would say it's probably pretty comparable knowing what's out there today.
Yeah, we've kind of experienced with both P3 and Driveline, so that's why, and a lot of it kind of matches up. That's why I just asked, but I a little bit more. Expand on that a little bit more. The shoulder pattern, or I can't remember what the slide said. The patented shoulder strength evaluation and those sorts of things, and then obviously building off of that into a band program. How flexible is that? Is that kind of per athlete? Is that based on per athlete? And how extensive do you get with that?
Yeah, so it's something we do every day. And I don't want to go too in depth today because we do have some things we're still working on there. We are in beta with that right now, but We do that every day. It takes anywhere from 30 seconds to 2 minutes to screen our athletes there. We run all of our guys through as the first thing to do when they walk in the door. And we are able to design dynamic band programming, set rep tension. We're also able to remove exercises in the day, basically prescribe from what we're seeing off of their populations, basically an entire set rep scheme and altering the tensions as well to hopefully over time, our goal is to jump into utilizing that for workload management in conjunction with the Modus sleeve and other workload platforms. But like I said, we're still observing the data and there's nothing set yet. We feel confident in it. We hope we're going to roll it out at ABCA this year, but we're not 100% there yet. So
Great. Thank you.
absolutely.
Hey guys, thanks for the talk. Sean Boland here from the University of Georgia. Have you looked at combining the Modus sleeve and the pitch AI just to try to validate the Modus sleeve a little further? Or is that anything that you guys have looked at?
It's been absolutely awesome working with Casey because of his athletes totally being engrossed with using that Modus sleeve. So we recently had, I think we've had, what are we at now, Casey? 22, 23 athletes throw 5 pitches where we have full Rapsodo data, full Modus data, and full pitch AI data. So our one of my graduate students and one of Casey's research assistants right now are diving into that to see what those relationships between mechanics and the Modus sleeve are. So we'll be reporting on that in probably within the next month to 8 weeks.
Hi, Michael. This is Joe Longamont with Indiana University. You mentioned the track data with Driveline. How soon are you going to be implementing some of the pitch AI? We had all our guys assessed last fall, and so I think our coaches are probably going to be interested in getting the new pitchers coming in and everything else assessed. So that's kind of where we're at with that, and that was the hardest aspect of it, was the biomechanics of it. Sensors flying off, all that kind of thing. And so I think once that's cleaned up, it'll be real efficient and a lot more efficient than what it was. And like Casey mentioned, with the numbers being down a little bit, different things like that.
Yep, that should be this summer as well. And then when I say the summer, I mean probably beginning of July or so.
Great, thanks, Mike.
No problem.
Well, if that's all we've got, I want to thank you guys again for taking the time to come out and show your stuff off to us. I think that's pretty awesome, and I'm excited to see what it looks like when it comes to completion.
Yeah, and once again, I really appreciate you having me on. And Jason, I look forward to continuing to work on some exciting projects with you over the next season.
Yeah, likewise.
Awesome.
Thanks for having us on, Jason.
Yeah, no problem. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day.